Welcome in, everybody, to Stocktwits TV. I'm Michele Steele here, and we have a lot to get to this Thursday. And before we get into some of the heavier stuff on the agenda, I want to talk about something that I think, Michael, is really awe-inspiring here. And I know as someone who is based in Houston, you've been tracking it very closely. Michael Parekh here, who is the author of the Substack newsletter Reset to Zero, former Goldman partner, AI analyst, tech aficionado. And I know that you've been following Artemis. And yes, 2 thumbs
for
up.
Years.
And the trip to the moon. What is the mood out there in tech circles? What are you watching most closely with this voyage?
Well, anyone my age, we all kind of hark back to the good old days over 50 years ago, since we had Apollo 8 and then Apollo 17. We put 12 all white men on the moon, but this time we're doing it different. We got a wonderful woman, a person of color, and a Canadian, by golly, going
even
up.
A Canadian,
4 of them, even a Canadian. We squished them in, and that's all. That's all. By the way, all the Apollo missions were 3. This time it's 4 because the U.S. wants to experiment with larger teams. We've got to send a bunch of these people up to see how they work together in these confined spaces. This mission is twice as long as anything we did way back when in the Apollo days. Those were 2 or 3 day missions. These are 10-day missions. It's great. It's wonderful to see it, but recognize that all of this is being done for geopolitical reasons. This is a race against China. The only reason we're doing this 50 years later, going back, is because we want to have a Super Bowl space game that we can beat them again before they go there. And they're planning their own set of missions to land their Chinese astronauts by 2030. Right now, if Artemis is on track with this test mission and then the next 1 or 2 manned missions, we theoretically could get there by 2028, 2029 versus their 20. That is the only reason we're spending $100 billion on this stuff.
Yeah, but I love that our country has a sense of ambition still around that, around getting to the moon. And that sense of ambition connects directly to what we're going to talk about next, because what's happening in AI right now, I think is every bit as audacious, perhaps, as trying to get to the moon again. And it's also very complicated. You've been writing all about it, and AI and the energy needs in particular in your Substack, our Substack Return to Zero RTZ newsletter. And I have to tell everybody, it is essential reading. And your latest piece really stuck with me. It's a wake-up call. I want to start, before we get to Sarah Week in Houston, I want to start with what's becoming a really alarming headline, and it is being watched and talked about quite a bit in financial circles. Data centers are getting delayed, and in some cases, Michael, outright canceled. We're talking about potentially 30 to 50% of large data centers scheduled to come online this year, facing delays due to power constraints, in some cases, equipment shortages, local opposition. How significant is this? U.S. construction under active build for data centers fell for the first time since 2020. Is this a blip or is this a structural problem?
Both, but let me explain. I do want to build a bridge from our conversation about the moon to here. The money that we're going to be spending on AI data centers and compute this year, all the big tech companies spending over $700 billion, that is 2x the amount we spent on all the Apollo missions to get to the moon the last time. So we are spending huge amounts of money as a country. So that's the good news. The bad news is, just like the moon missions, which took over a decade to land the first man on the moon, and then another half a decade to land another dozen or so, a total of dozen. This time too, the AI infrastructure build, we have to look at it as a 5 and 10 year build. It takes 3 years minimum to build 1 gigawatt power data center, $50 billion per gigawatt. These are not up and done kind of things. So as we look at the Sarah Week, which is the big energy conference with the data center people this past week in Houston, this is a long-term marathon, basically. And there are lots of blips. Michelle. The blips are everything from shortage of chips, memory chips, because the SK Hynix and the Microns and the Samsungs of the world can't literally build enough chips because they don't have enough fabs, because we're shifting chips from our smartphones to the data centers. And as a result, these smartphones and computers and even our PlayStations are going up $100, $200. So there are a lot of blips in terms of the supply of components, supply of talent, and most important, the power, as you said. The power piece is very key. And the energy sources in the US, we are blessed with natural gas and oil, which provides 75% of the power for most of the data centers here. We also have potentially nuclear. Nuclear got revived in this country just in the space of a couple of years because of the AI imperative. That's the good news. Bad news is it takes 5 to 10 years for us in the US to build one nuclear plant or recommission one. China is building 7 to 10 of them in less than 5 years because they have a top-down economy run by technocrats, engineers, versus our governments run by lawyers. And that's one of the reasons for the blips that you mentioned in the US. Lots and lots of regulatory blips. Lots of people saying, hey, I don't want that data center in my backyard. I don't want all that ugly belching power station that's fueling up the gigawatt in my backyard. And so you've got regulatory impasses, which is why Satya Nadella of Microsoft, one of the biggest builders of these data centers, said, hey, one of my big problems is not the chips anymore. I've got the chips storing up in my warehouse. I'm waiting for the power. It takes 2 to 3 years to get the power grid. On top of that, one last thing, blip. It's not just building the power centers and the data centers. It's also the grid, all the wiring and all that stuff. For that, we need thousands of trained people. Guess what? America with 330 million people versus China with 1.4 billion. We ain't got enough people. We're not graduating enough people to both build the chips, to build the grid. So all of that takes time. So good news, we have a lot of money, a lot of ambition to build some of the biggest data centers and power supply on the planet. Bad news is it's going to all take a little longer than we like. So we are constantly going to have to do more with less. This is a piece that I just wrote. This is reminiscent of the 1990s when the whole world discovered internet online services like AOL and everyone rushed into it. You're too young, but millions of people would dial up every day and wait for 10, 15, 20 minutes to get online. Today, the same thing's happening with chatbots and AI agents. You get online and you run OpenClaw to do everything. And all of a sudden, my Anthropic Claude pops up and says, oh, run out of compute. You're on your subscription tier. You're at the limit. Next time, in about 4 hours because it's a break. They're taking a break because they don't have enough power. That's our reality. So it's a good news, bad news situation, and we have to get used to it. They're all doing it on.
We have to get used to it, but it's interesting to see how quickly the dynamic has shifted around the conversation about power. You're in Houston. CERAWeek just wrapped up, and I love the framing of your piece. It used to be energy giants calling the shots at CERAWeek. Now it's big tech really setting the agenda. No, Microsoft, Google, they were just as prominent as Chevron was. That's where the power dynamic is heading.
And they're coming in, Michele, and saying, they bring not just one, but dozens of checkbooks. Here's the money. The problem is the power industry, number one, has, just can't get the old equipment as fast enough. And they have their own regulatory regimes to go through. So the hyperscalers are increasingly building power in what's called behind the meter. They're basically building their own solutions, hiring different technology companies to get the power and build it. Elon built entire power infrastructure for his AI data centers across the state from his core thing. And this creativity is going on everywhere. We are repurposing jet engines to build power for data centers. There's an entire class of industry that's been created where we're taking huge traditional ways to create power, like jet engines and engines for ships, repurposing them to build power for data centers. And it's all happening independent of the regular traditional power industry. And that's the craziness that's going on. So you've got the state utilities kind of just chugging along and ramping up as fast as they can. The regulators trying to come in and adjudicate all the disputes, and the big AI companies saying, "Hey, we need this yesterday," because guess what? They're taking on hundreds of billions of dollars of debt at very, very high interest rates. If they can't get the data centers on and make revenue from people trying to do things online with agents and things, guess what? They're going to take huge hits, and Wall Street is going to dock their stocks in a big way in the next 2 or 3 years, especially in a year, Michele, when we are looking at not 1, not 2, but 3 mega IPOs trying to raise valuations
SpaceX,
up to
yes.
$3 trillion this year. And they got to make sure all this reads nicely, the power piece particularly, in the prospectus.
Meantime, we have the dispute in Iran. I don't know if I can call it that dispute. Might be understating the situation.
It's a war.
It is a war. It is a war.
It's a multi-party war, by the way. It's about to get potentially a lot worse. I grew up there, so I grew up in Kuwait, so I know the region very well. And
wow.
And this is far more than just a couple of bombs and Hormuz and so on. This is uprooting millennia worth of tribal instincts and so on. This is a big ass deal. It may have been started for this or that specific reason, but it is unpacking a whole can of worms that is not understood here in the West.
Yeah, and power was seen as a constraint on data centers and the growth of AI even before the tumult that in the energy markets that we've seen over the last 3 weeks. And so
it's more than power. Everyone focuses on Hormuz and the power. Guess what? Majority of the helium that we need to build the chips at TSMC, the big chunk of the helium comes from the facilities that are building the natural gas and oil in the Middle East. While they're doing oil and gas, they're building helium. They're making helium, which is the second biggest element. I have a big, deep post on this. It comes out of the Middle East. It's already gotten bombed, and 20 to 30% of that capacity is going to be offline for the next 2 or 3 years, which means that the supply of chips, which was already getting dicey, is now even more dicey. For not even if the war stops tomorrow, we're going to have less helium for the next 2 years, which means that all the chips that we need to turn on the data centers that we were talking about with the power gets delayed months.
How should investors frame this in their minds? And maybe not even investors, but really anyone who consumes these products.
Yeah.
How can they prepare themselves, and how should they frame this?
If you're a consumer and a avid user of AI services, then you need to be ready to spend more. Diversify your supply. You subscribe to all the services, spend more, build local AI. I just spent $30,000 on local computers and so on to build my own AI models, to run my own AI models independent of the power grid.
Wow.
So just those kinds of, there's a lot of, those are for the early adopters and heavy users. For the investors, which is your core question, the way to think about this is, look, long term, the next 3 to 5 years, the supply and demand issues are going to continue. They're going to be jagged, etc. But this is not a situation of, oh my God, is this demand going to go away? The demand is up and to the right for the next 5 years. So there are going to be lots of opportunities from a stock point of view to pick your points on when you come in and come out. If you're trading oriented, there's going to be a lot more volatility. So you'll have a lot more opportunity to do that. But do it carefully. If you're a long-term investor, then pick your points in terms of entry points and staying points, and then buying more points at the right point. Again, this is not investment advice, but this is a high volatile situation. That's the bad news. The good news is there are relative certainties on the demand picture and a number of increasing uncertainties in terms of the jaggedness of the supply. So not just energy that we're talking about and power for the grid, energy out of the Middle East, but also helium supplies, chip supplies, and just a lot of things. Just this year, we've had 2 or 3 things thrown at us in terms of the AI picture that I, didn't have on my bingo card, 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And it changes all the models that I build.
Yeah, it certainly changes the calculus here for so many people, whether you're on the consumer part of the equation or the investor part for our audience's needs. Now, I want to end on something a little bit more forward looking, because I know you are not a doom and gloom person, Michael. No. You look through the noise for us. So despite all of these, I don't even know if I could call them short-term headwinds at this point, because the average Middle East conflict tends to be around 3 years. But despite whether they're short or sort of intermediate term headwinds, the delays, the geopolitics of things, the energy bottlenecks, I mean, the tariffs are still with us, don't forget. Nope. What are some names you actually like for the next few years? Where would you want to be positioned if you're investing in if you're a tech investor? Yep.
First of all, not stock recommendations, but I've got big posts on this. My core holdings are three. In no particular order. Nvidia, it's cheaper now than ever. People say, oh, the reason it's cheap is because 60% of the revenues come from 4 or 5 companies. True. But guess what? Those 4 or 5 companies, they're not going most likely anywhere because they just can't get enough of the chips that Nvidia makes. And it's now Nvidia for the first time is trading at a lower multiple than the S&P. So that remains number 1 for me. Google is my number 2. Again, everyone knows the story, but the thing is, what they don't understand is that they're so vertically integrated with TPUs and the models and so on, and the distribution to literally 4 billion plus users around the world of their Gemini services. And remember, their partnership with Apple kicks in the next 3-4 months. So Gemini is going to be available to 2.5 billion Apple users. So Gemini remains my core pick. And number 3 is Apple, which everyone is viewed as the laggard in AI. I disagree. I just did a big piece on their 50th anniversary, they just passed. I think the best things are ahead for Apple, especially on AI. And it's not understood. They are becoming the big toll gate keeper of all the AI services, and it's not modeled into the numbers. Services is already the number 2 revenue producer at Apple behind the iPhone. It could end up being the number 1 in the next 3 years. Wow. And I don't think people have understood that yet. So those 3. Yeah. And then I have one more comment on the investment side, if you have a moment. And that is that, look, I, as a long-term investor, I typically invest in indices, the passive, S&P or tech indices, etc. There is a short-term danger on this that I just wanted to flag. I did a big post on this. Because 3 mega tech IPOs, SpaceX, Anthropic, and OpenAI are all going public this year. SpaceX, the first one, that's $3 trillion of market cap. And they're all chumming up with the index companies to accelerate their entry of their stocks within 2 weeks versus months that takes.
They are changing the rules. They are changing the rules to include,
As a former head of internet research analyst at Goldman Sachs, this is not something I recommend. I think companies need to get their sea legs as public companies. And this acceleration is a bad thing, is my general view. As an investor, I think this does a disservice to passive investors because it crams down a huge amount of passive demand into these indices to hold up the stocks, where, by the way, they're loosening the insider restrictions that all the insiders, the VCs, etc., are going to get earlier lockup releases of their thing into the passive demand. I think that's a bad thing. I'm going to just say it outright, because my job in my 30 years of investing career is to align the interests of both sides, the sellers and the buyers. And this is a bad thing. So if you're a passive investor in indices, then consider moving some of your investments from market cap weighted indices to equal weighted indices. So it's a subtle thing, but that is not a stock recommendation. Who knows? If the bull market continues, war ends, everything is wonderful, then everything will be fine. But you've got to basically look at risk and reward and constantly assess that. And so I just wanted to give you that little bit of caution on top of the bullishness.
Yeah, these indexes are rewriting and the exchanges are rewriting the rules to benefit the sellers, not your say, passive retirement account. Market-weighted retirement account. Really appreciate that insight there. Michael Parekh, RTZ newsletter on Substack. Essential reading for me if you want to understand the AI infrastructure story and the power story as well. Michael, always great to have you on. Thanks for being here.
Wonderful to be here. And let's root for the 4 astronauts who are going to be back in 9 days.
To the moon and back.
Back.
Thank you.
Thank you.